In under a minute, Jasmine Crockett tore open a blood-red envelope live on national television and detonated a $1.8 million scandal tied to Ivanka Trump's charity. The air was sliced with audible gasps. Donald Trump shot to his feet, veins pronounced, voice shaking. Yet Jasmine remained still, her gaze unwavering. The revelation was volatile enough to set off a former president in full view of the nation. The chamber no longer resembled Congress. It felt like a courtroom doused in gasoline, a single spark away from eruption. The lights above weren't merely bright. They blazed with the intensity of an interrogation lamp. Microphones hovered unnervingly close, picking up every subtle breath, every tense heartbeat. The very chairs seemed to groan under the strain. Each breath felt louder, heavier. Everyone present was holding on, waiting for the match to strike. At the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett. No shuffling papers, no nervous sipping, no blinking. Only the red folder before her, still and ominous. Its color a clear warning, a symbol of danger. She didn't move. Neither did it. Opposite her sat Ivanka Trump, composed in cream designer wear, as pristine and controlled as a porcelain doll. Her hands folded neatly, her chin held high. Her posture declared experience. But her eyes betrayed her, darting quickly, searching for weaknesses, scanning for exits. The room was holding its breath. 3 rows back, journalists leaned in like predators circling their prey. Cameramen zoomed tighter, framing every twitch. Overhead, a faint electrical hum filled the silence, sounding more like a ticking fuse. Then, the door opened. No knock, no warning. Donald Trump entered like thunder crashing through a cathedral. Words weren't necessary. His entrance alone rattled the room. His navy suit was razor-sharp, his stare searing. No one whispered. Still, the sound of pounding hearts filled the vacuum. Even the Capitol Police hesitated. Should they intervene? Escort him out? But no one dared. He wasn't on any list. He had no place there. But that didn't matter. He moved with entitled certainty toward the gallery, as though laws bent around him. He never looked at Jasmine. He didn't have to. His eyes locked onto Ivanka, and for the first time, hers faltered. Though he took a seat in the last row, his presence dominated. The atmosphere shifted, pulled toward him as if by force. Jasmine remained unmoved. Her hand rested softly on the closed red folder. Still sealed, still silent. Now, that red folder seemed to throb in the room, as if it had a pulse of its own. The chairwoman's voice finally broke the tension. We now begin today's hearing on the financial records and oversight of the Ivanka Trump Foundation. She turned to Ivanka. Ms. Trump, you may begin your statement. Ivanka's voice emerged soft, too soft. It was the tone of someone attempting to shrink themselves, to appear harmless. Thank you, Madam Chair, she said, wearing a practiced smile. I'm here to address any concerns and clarify any misunderstandings surrounding my foundation's donations and organizational structure. I am confident everything will be resolved with full transparency. Jasmine responded with a single tap on the red folder. Just once, like she was knocking on a door no one dared open. Still, she didn't speak. Not yet. Her eyes, however, stayed locked on Ivanka, intent and unflinching, like a storm bearing down on a city skyline. That folder, still closed, lay there like a weapon. Its contents unknown, but potent enough to make Ivanka sweat and summon Donald Trump into the room uninvited. Ivanka's words drifted through the chamber like a pleasant fragrance, well-rehearsed and carefully calibrated to vanish without residue. Thank you, Madam Chair, she repeated with the grace of silk. The Ivanka Trump Foundation has always operated with integrity and transparency, focusing on children's education, women's empowerment, and public health initiatives nationwide. Any confusion, I believe, arises from isolated misinterpretations of documentation which, in proper context, comply fully with federal guidelines. Cameras clicked in steady rhythm, recording each word, each glance. Ivanka didn't stumble once. Her delivery was smooth, deliberate, the product of legal polish and media grooming. But Jasmine remained still. No pen moved across her notepad. No side comments whispered to aides. She just stared, silent and focused, like a bird of prey observing a wounded dove pretending it could still fly. Her hand rested calmly atop the red folder, its weight commanding the center of the table like a sealed verdict. When Ivanka finished her opening remarks, she leaned back ever so slightly, the gesture unmistakable. There. My part's done. That's when Jasmine moved. No formal thanks. No scripted transitions. Just a lean forward, slow and intentional, the kind of motion made when the outcome is already tipped. Then came the question. Ms. Trump, she said, voice even. Do you recall authorizing a transfer of $1.8 million to an event labeled Venice Gala in March of 2022? Ivanka's smile faltered, but barely. That was for a fundraising event. Yes, she answered quickly, though I believe it was postponed due to external circumstances. Jasmine lifted an eyebrow. Postponed or canceled? I'd have to verify with the events team. Ivanka replied, her voice still calm. But to my knowledge. No need. Jasmine interrupted, her voice now cool and flat. It was canceled. Publicly. 2 weeks before that payment was made. The silence that followed was dense and suffocating. Somewhere deep in the gallery, someone audibly exhaled. Jasmine reached beneath the folder, not opening it yet, and slid out a single printed document. This is your foundation's official press release, dated March 9th. It reads, due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts, the Venice Gala has been canceled and will not be rescheduled during the current fiscal year. Dated 12 days before the $1.8 million wire transfer, Jasmine said, her voice even. Care to explain? Ivanka shifted slightly in her seat. The pressure in the room tightened. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone remained composed, but cut sharp as glass. If the event was canceled, she continued, and your own foundation confirmed it wouldn't be rescheduled, where, exactly, did that $1.8 million go? Ivanka opened her mouth, then hesitated. For a fleeting moment, the daughter of a former president looked like she was flipping through a mental script, only to find the next page blacked out. The accounting office would have handled those disbursements independently, she finally said, her voice slower now, carefully measured. But you signed it, Jasmine interrupted. Ivanka's head tilted, uncertainty creeping in. I'm sorry. Jasmine moved her hand to the red folder for the first time, tapping it once with a fingernail. A sharp, faint click echoed across the microphone. Your signature, she said, appears directly next to the transfer order. Dated March 21st, approved personally. Ivanka blinked, lips parting slightly, but no reply came. Jasmine leaned forward again, her face unreadable. So I'll ask again, where did the money go? The air tightened like a noose. Every camera turned toward the folder, not Ivanka. The room had gone silent, not with peace, but with tension dense enough to suffocate. Ivanka looked around, first at the committee chair, then over her shoulder to her attorney, searching for help, a script, a lifeline. But none came. Only silence. That's when Jasmine slid the red envelope into the center of the desk. Not with drama, not with a slam, just a steady, deliberate motion, like placing a match beside a trail of gasoline. Its deep crimson hue blazed against the pale wood, a striking wound in the heart of the room. The envelope was aged, a little worn, but still sealed. Intact. Untouched. Cameras zoomed in with almost predatory focus. Reporters froze mid-sentence. On C-SPAN, the director cut to a split screen. Jasmine's face, Ivanka's face, the envelope, and in the back row, Donald Trump's jaw clenched so tight the muscle in his cheek visibly jumped. No one else in this room has seen what I'm about to read, Jasmine said, voice steady but edged like steel. But the sender, he sat 2 doors down from you, Ms. Trump, for 6 years. Until the day he left. No press release, no goodbye, no pension. She peeled open the flap. Ivanka swallowed hard. Jasmine unfolded the letter slowly, as though the moment itself were resisting, time stretched thin by anticipation. Then she read aloud. To whom it may concern, I can no longer live with what I've seen. The Ivanka Trump Foundation is not a nonprofit. It is a financial laundering mechanism used to funnel donor money into private real estate projects run by the Trump Organization. The room detonated. Gasps rippled like explosions. Even the committee chair gripped the edge of her desk. A Republican aide fumbled, knocking over a water bottle. On live television, the camera zoomed in so tight on Ivanka's face that every micro-expression betrayed her. She blinked rapidly, struggling to stay composed. Jasmine kept reading. The Venice Gala was never real. We fabricated vendor invoices to justify the wire transfer. Ms. Trump personally approved the final ledger under direct instruction from her father. I speak now, the letter said, because silence makes me complicit. Donald Trump leaned forward in his seat. Ivanka sat frozen, every muscle locked, her face stuck between shock and exposure, like someone caught in the exact instant a lie dies in their throat. Jasmine laid the letter beside the envelope. No theatrics, just truth placed plainly beneath the brutal lights. She looked up, first to Ivanka, then to the committee, and finally into the lens of every camera. There's a word for this, she said quietly. It's not misunderstanding. It's fraud. A beat passed. No one moved. Even the air felt quieter. What if this wasn't just Ivanka's doing? What if it was part of something older, a pattern, a family blueprint, refined and inherited? For a breathless moment, the entire chamber hung suspended, not in awe, but in that strange, paralyzing stillness that comes when a fault line finally gives way, collapsing under years of silent pressure. Jasmine Crockett had just read a sealed confession, a damning document connecting Ivanka Trump's foundation to deliberate financial fraud, with every thread tracing directly to her father. That alone could have shattered the room. But what followed wasn't fire. It was something colder. Something steeped in arrogance, age, and entitlement. Donald J. Trump rose to his feet. The sharp screech of his chair scraping the marble floor echoed like metal against bone. Heads turned before the sound had even faded. His voice followed, a low, disdainful growl. Sit down, girl. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. It wasn't a shout. It was a command hurled like a stone, meant to diminish, to reduce. It carried an assumption so deep it didn't need explanation, an echo from an era when power didn't explain itself. The entire room stopped breathing. Even the overhead lights seemed to dim beneath the weight of it. Staffers froze mid-keystroke. Senators leaned back slowly, exchanging glances, uncertain whether to recoil or wait for someone else to break the silence. Behind the press line, a C-SPAN tech whispered, "Did he just?" Jasmine didn't blink. She turned toward him slowly, deliberately, her gaze cool and measured. There was no outrage in her expression, no surprise, only precision. Her eyes weren't reacting, they were targeting. She let the silence settle around her like a veil, suffocating the moment and stillness. Then, in a voice soft as thunder wrapped in velvet, she answered, "I'll sit when the truth gets tired of standing." A ripple surged through the press gallery. Someone gasped. A Republican aide lowered his eyes to the carpet, frozen in place. Ivanka's face turned pale, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the table's edge. The energy in the room shifted, but this time, it didn't orbit around Trump. Jasmine took one step forward. Her heels struck the marble with deliberate precision. Not loud, but undeniable. Her voice didn't rise. It deepened. "You don't get to shrink me with that word," she said, never breaking her gaze. "I've heard it whispered behind doors. I've heard it shouted from front porches. I've seen it written in case files where women who looked like me never made it home. But today," she continued, "you said it here, in this chamber, on live television, with the whole world watching." Trump's face flushed crimson. His jaw locked, but no words came. The committee chair lifted her gavel, ready to intervene, but Jasmine raised her hand gently, signaling to let it stand. "No, Madam Chair," she said. "Let it stay. Let the country hear it, raw, just as we've heard it for generations. Let them see what power sounds like when it feels threatened." Reporters scrambled to capture her words. Social media feeds exploded. MSNBC cut into programming. Twitter combusted. Jasmine turned back to her seat. Her voice softened again. Cooler, clearer, sharper. "I wasn't elected to be quiet. I wasn't raised to be small. And I wasn't sent here to be told when to sit." And then she did sit, not because she was commanded to, but because she chose to. And when she did, the room didn't return to normal. It reoriented around her. What happens when a single word meant to silence ends up igniting the entire country instead? The silence she left behind clung to the room like smoke. Heavy, unshakable. Even seated, she held the atmosphere in her grasp. Her hands moved with calm precision. No rush, no hesitation. She tapped twice on her tablet, then turned toward the projection screen. The lights dimmed on cue. and on the screen appeared something understated but devastating. A plain white spreadsheet. Black text. For rows. For transactions. Each marked Venice Gala vendor disbursement. Each dated after the gala had been officially canceled. Each transferring exactly $450,000 to a Delaware-based LLC. The header on the projection screen read, Recipient, ETT Strategic Holdings, LLC. Committee members leaned forward, squinting at the unfamiliar name. At home, millions of viewers inched closer to their screens. Jasmine didn't pause. She tapped her tablet again. The screen zoomed in, revealing the LLC's registered manager, Eric Theodore Trump. A murmur swept through the chamber, a sharp intake of breath, a pen slipping from someone's grasp and clattering onto the floor. Jasmine glanced at Ivanka, whose face had gone stiff, not yet panicked, but hollow. It was the look of someone remembering a detail they had hoped was long forgotten. Jasmine let the moment settle before she addressed the room. Her voice glided calmly through the silence. So let me get this straight. A gala that never took place transferred nearly $2 million to a shell company managed by your brother. Ivanka opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Another tap. Now the screen showed a screenshot of an internal email. Subject line, Venice Wires. Dated 5 days before the transaction. The text was simple, devastating. Just call it a gala. No one checks these. The quote landed like a grenade. A reporter covered her mouth. One Republican congressman shifted in his seat, visibly unsettled. The chamber was no longer shocked. It was nauseated. Jasmine rose again, not for drama, but for clarity. So, Ms. Trump, she said slowly, was that your strategy? Create a fake event, redirect the funds, file it under charity, and hope the rest of us were too distracted, too broke, or too exhausted to read the fine print. Ivanka cleared her throat, but still gave no response. In the back row, Donald Trump leaned forward, fists clenched against his knees, his breathing hard and audible. Every camera caught it. Every mic picked it up. Jasmine didn't wait for Ivanka's denial, because by now, no one needed it. She stepped aside, letting the numbers on the screen speak louder than any words. This isn't an oversight, she said. It's choreography, and it's been rehearsed. Her gaze met the main broadcast lens, streaming live into 48 million homes. You don't get to hide behind the word charity while cutting checks to yourselves. Not anymore. The spreadsheet stayed up, clean, simple, damning. White screen, black numbers, lies in plain ink. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She sat again, unshaken, like every moment had been rehearsed, right down to her breath. Adjusting her microphone, she leaned in slightly and said, "For the record, I'd like to enter one final exhibit. Audio file 17B. She tapped once more. At first, just static, soft and distant, like a wiretap from another room. The chamber collectively leaned in, uncertain of what was coming. Then a voice, trembling and unmistakably familiar, broke through the white noise. Ivanka Trump's. Dad said we'll lose everything if this gets out. Just sign it, and we'll clean it up later. No reaction. No defense. Then, crack. Donald Trump slammed his palm onto the railing in front of him. The sound echoed through the microphones like thunder. That's a lie, he shouted, his voice breaking. She never said that. The committee chair didn't hesitate. Mr. Trump, you are not recognized. You will remain silent or be removed. But Trump was already standing, his face flushed, finger jabbing toward Jasmine like he was pointing at a burning crime scene. You doctored that, he yelled. You people, this is criminal. His voice rose, frayed, desperate, unraveling. Jasmine didn't blink. Still seated, hands folded, her expression didn't change. The voice is yours, Mr. Trump, she said coolly. We verified the file using a third-party forensic analysis, complete with timestamp, device ID, and full chain of custody. She tapped the tablet once more. The full transcript spread across the marble wall, line by damning line. Courtroom graffiti for the nation to read. Ivanka remained frozen, her face blank, but her hands trembled just enough for the cameras to capture. She knew what was next. Everyone did. Jasmine stood. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, Jasmine lowered it, just enough to draw every ear closer. Her words landed with chilling clarity. This wasn't an accident. It was a family decision. The press gallery erupted in murmurs. Emails and spreadsheets were damning enough. But this was intent. This was conspiracy, captured on tape. Donald Trump stood like he might explode again, but this time, he didn't. He remained still, chest rising and falling, lips compressed into a thin, colorless line. He knew what was coming. Jasmine allowed the quiet to settle over the chamber once more. Then she turned to the committee. The full audio file contains over 2 minutes of conversation, she said. What I played was only the first sentence. The air fractured. Gasps spread like tremors. Phones flashed to life. Journalists scurried to relay what had just been said. America held its breath. Jasmine placed her tablet down gently, like a final chess piece. Her gaze cut through the camera lens. And if this is what they said in private, what else are they hiding on tape? The question didn't need an answer. It simply hung there, lingering with the weight of everything unspoken. What else had she found? Whose voice might echo next from the speakers? The last line of the recording still hung in the air like the haze after a gunshot. No one moved, not even the stenographer. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, suspended mid-stroke. The committee chair sat frozen, her face pale and unreadable, eyes fixed on the projection screen. Ivanka stared ahead, motionless, as though willing herself awake from a nightmare she could no longer blink away. Jasmine waited, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. She had learned, over years in courtrooms, that truth doesn't need to be rushed. It lands hardest when it breathes. She opened the red folder again, not for theatrics, but with clinical precision. From it, she withdrew a single sheet of paper. One name, one signature, one line of ink with the weight to unseat dynasties. She held it up. The letter I read earlier, she said, her voice steady, was not anonymous. The cameras zoomed in, as if the lens itself needed confirmation. It was written and signed by Mr. Caleb Wexler. The chamber erupted again. This time, gasps sounded more like detonations. A notebook dropped. A reporter, unable to contain disbelief, whispered into a live mic. No way. Caleb Wexler. The name once dominated headlines and political blogs across 2020. The Golden Boy. The trusted senior advisor. Ivanka's shadow strategist. He was young, immaculate, invisible by design. And then, 6 months post-election, he vanished. No goodbye, no scandal. Just disappeared, like a page torn clean from a book. Jasmine let the weight of the name settle across the marble walls. Then she looked at Ivanka. You remember him, don't you? She asked, voice level. Cold. Ivanka remained silent. Her hands clung to her chair, knuckles bone-white. Jasmine continued, voice unwavering. Caleb was there the night the documents were altered. He drafted the language for the misdirection memo. He sat beside you for 15 months. She paused, and when he started asking questions, he was silenced. He told us as much in his letter. The screens flared to life again. A still from a Fox Business interview. Caleb Wexler, clean-cut, sharp-suited, the image of composed intellect. Below him, the headline, Ivanka Trump's closest campaign architect. Ivanka didn't look up. Her silence was no longer calculated. It was panic disguised in pearls. Jasmine carefully folded the page and slid it back into the folder. Her voice sliced cleanly through the silence. He didn't come forward for revenge. He came forward because he said the guilt was becoming unbearable. In the back row, Donald Trump hadn't moved, but the rigidity in his jaw told its own story. His daughter was unraveling, and his name was on the next document. He knew it, and so did she. Jasmine stepped back from the microphone, and for the first time since the hearing began, a smile curved across her face. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for the headlines. It was for the truth, finally clawing its way into daylight. What kind of secrets make a trusted insider vanish without a trace? And what did Caleb Wexler witness that made him risk everything to speak? His name still lingered in the air like the smoke from a fuse that never stopped burning. His image on the screen, once the golden strategist, now the unexpected whistleblower, became the fracture point no one saw coming. On one side stood Jasmine, resolute, armed with documents and undeniable calm. On the other, Ivanka Trump, coming apart at the seams under the lights. And in between them sat a room full of lawmakers slowly realizing that the foundation beneath them wasn't just shaking, it was cracking. Then came a voice, but not from the Democrats, not from the press. It came from the last place anyone expected, the right. A throat cleared at the Republican side of the bench. Calm, young, Steady. Madam Chair, said Representative Mason Carr, a freshman congressman from Ohio. 29 years old. Conservative. Trump endorsed. And until now, completely silent. Head snapped toward him as though someone had dropped a hammer. His microphone lit red. Even Jasmine's brow lifted slightly. I believe we need to consider the evidence objectively, Carr said, voice measured, hands folded. If Mr. Wexler, a man this administration once celebrated, is on record, under oath, with testimony that aligns with these documents and audio files, we cannot ignore it. Not if we care about the integrity of this chamber. The reaction was electric. Gasps flickered like sparks. A Republican aide dropped his phone. Another covered his mouth. Ivanka turned slowly toward Carr, expression unreadable. No polish this time. Just stunned disbelief. Jasmine remained still. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The moment was speaking for her. In seconds, alert banners lit up screens in homes and offices across the country. MSNBC breaking. GOP congressman calls for expanded Trump family inquiry. Fox News. Freshman Republican breaks ranks over Trump Foundation records. On Twitter, the clip exploded. Carr wasn't grandstanding. He didn't smirk or posture. He just leaned back in his chair and let the silence fold around him like ash after a quiet detonation. But it was too late for damage control. The story had burst its partisan bubble. It was no longer a Democrats' fight. It had crossed the aisle. And that was the one thing Trump's inner circle never prepared for, betrayal from within. Donald Trump leaned forward, jaw clenched, whispering to an aide with frantic urgency. His lips moved fast, his face flushed with rage, but the mics caught nothing. They didn't need to. The fury was unmistakable. Ivanka didn't shift. She lowered her eyes, one hand resting flat on the table, as if bracing herself against an invisible collapse. Jasmine remained quiet, but something in her expression changed. Not victory, not vindication, just quiet certainty, like the sea watching the sky darken. What happens when the dam doesn't break from pressure, but from within? The moment Carr broke ranks, something shifted in the room. It didn't just tilt. It fractured. The Trump defense, built on years of denial, deflection, and dominance, was cracking. And Jasmine Crockett hadn't even reached her final exhibit. That's when Donald Trump snapped. He surged from his seat with volcanic force, voice shattering the air. This is all fake. Lies. Every damn bit of it. He didn't speak. He roared. Desperate. Feral. Clinging to the belief that volume could erase ink, silence whistleblowers, and drown out the facts. Committee members jolted. Capitol Police moved. For a tense second, it seemed he might charge the dais. But Jasmine didn't budge. She remained seated. Still. Calm. Watching his rage spill out like gasoline on tile. Then, without lifting her voice, she leaned toward the microphone and said, "It's not politics, Mr. Trump." Jasmine lifted a stapled document between her fingers. The pages glared under the chamber lights, white-hot, undeniable. "It's not politics," she said, her voice low but absolute. "It's accounting." The room recoiled into stillness. Then, with precise steps, she moved toward the central screen. Each click of her heels struck the marble like the beat of a countdown clock. "This," she continued, unfolding the document so the cameras could capture every corner, "is a federal IRS report. Unpublished. Obtained via subpoena." She held it high, then pointed to a section mid-page. It outlines 5 misclassified transactions between the Ivanka Trump Foundation and ETT Strategic Holdings, all flagged by a junior auditor in 2022. She tapped the page again. And right here, line 87, Ms. Trump's signature approving a disbursement labeled as Emergency Disaster Relief. Behind her, the screen lit up with the zoomed-in signature. It was clear, unmistakable. Ivanka Trump's name in crisp black ink, centered, time-stamped, verified. A wave of gasps rippled across the gallery. Reporters shifted in their seats. The IRS watermark gleamed faintly in the corner, a quiet seal of finality. Ivanka dropped her gaze. Her hands no longer trembled. They simply rested in her lap, unmoving, as if her body had left the room while her image remained. Donald Trump blinked rapidly at the screen. Then, with a sudden slam of his palm against the wooden rail, he roared. "She didn't sign that. She doesn't even do accounting. You planted it. All of you. This is illegal." The chairwoman reached for her gavel. But Jasmine remained steady. Her focus didn't drift for a second. She kept her eyes locked on the document. Calm. Clinical. Then by all means, she said, voice cold. Have your legal team contact the IRS and accuse them of forgery. Let's see how that goes. The silence that followed was immediate, airtight. Jasmine turned back to the committee, lifting the report one final time for the record. When money moves in silence, she said, signatures tell the story. And this one tells us everything. The cameras zoomed in. Reporters typed furiously. Newsrooms went live. Breaking banners flashed like sirens across televisions nationwide. Behind her, Trump sank slowly back into his seat. The fury in his eyes still burned, but now there was something else behind it. Emptiness. Because even he knew, if the signatures were real, the lies were done. It wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't politics. It was proof. Plain, undeniable, government-certified evidence. And it was staring the nation in the face. Jasmine had delivered the final blow. And now, only the silence remained, the kind that comes after the hammer hits the nail for the last time. Ivanka didn't speak. Not to Jasmine. Not to the committee. Not even to her own attorney. She stared at the floor, her silence echoing louder than any words. A Democratic member leaned in, ready to press further, but before the question came, Ivanka raised one hand slightly, a signal. She turned to her attorney. Her lips moved, a whisper only he could hear. He leaned close, nodded, then spoke into the mic with all the weight of surrender. Madam Chair, he said, his voice strained. On behalf of my client, we respectfully invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. It landed like thunder. Gasps rolled through the chamber. This wasn't just unprecedented, it was historic. A former first daughter, refusing to speak under oath on live national television, backed into silence by irrefutable evidence. Screens across America lit up with the moment. The shock. The fall. Jasmine didn't react. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just nodded, because she had expected this. Planned for it. Ivanka folded her hands. Her gaze remained low. The same woman who once graced the covers of Forbes and Vogue now sat unmoving, encased in silence, frozen like a sculpture chiseled by scandal. And then it broke. Donald Trump rose once more, but he didn't yell. He didn't protest. He stood, jaw tight, face deep crimson, fists clenched so tightly the veins in his hands looked ready to burst. He looked at Ivanka. She didn't meet his gaze. Not once. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. No statement. No spin. Just silence. There was no goodbye. Only the echo of Donald Trump's footsteps retreating down the marble aisle, captured in crisp HD as every camera tracked the vanishing back of a man whose empire was unraveling in real time. The sound, sharp and fading, felt like the tail end of an era collapsing under its own weight. Reporters surged. Capitol Police held the line. The double doors swung wide, then closed behind him. And just like that, he was gone. A Republican member muttered under his breath, Jesus. An aide whispered, did that just happen? No one answered. They didn't have to. The screen behind Jasmine still burned with truth. Ivanka Trump. Signature confirmed. Disbursement authorized. The chamber fell silent again, but it wasn't the tense hush of uncertainty. This was different. This was final. The kind of silence that settles after a verdict is read and everyone realizes the world just shifted. Jasmine stayed in her seat. Her expression was unchanged. No gloating. No bitterness. Just truth, clear and unwavering. Then she spoke, softly, but every mic caught it. Sometimes, she said, silence isn't protection. It's confession. And across the country, in living rooms and classrooms, courtrooms and cafes, millions watched as a family long thought untouchable was brought low, not by spectacle, but by ink, by paper, by the woman who dared to read it out loud. Behind her, the door that swallowed Donald Trump slammed shut. But his exit wasn't the end. It was ignition. Within minutes, the footage was clipped, subtitled, and streaming across every screen in America. Not just the red folder, not just the signature, but the moment of stillness, the Fifth Amendment invocation, the blankness in Ivanka's stare, and the sound of a billionaire father walking away with nowhere left to run. In law schools from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, lectures stopped. Professors wheeled in projectors. Students leaned forward, jaws slack, notebooks abandoned. At Harvard, a constitutional law professor whispered, "This moment will be studied for the next 50 years." At Spelman College, a young black woman stood and clapped when Jasmine said, "Silence isn't protection." The room rose with her. In Union Square, the message hit the pavement. Protest signs appeared within hours, hand-painted in red. "Truth isn't polite." More followed. Truth stood up. "If you're quiet now, you're complicit." News helicopters circled overhead. Crowds gathered, not with outrage, but with clarity, chanting not to protest, but to remember. "We saw it. We heard it. We remember it." In Arizona, retirees texted their grandkids, "Did you see that Jasmine woman?" In Detroit, a former IRS agent called into local radio, "This isn't politics. She just read the audit out loud." And it stung. In Mississippi, a pastor paused mid-sermon and said, "When truth walks into a room and lies walk out, you've just seen God's justice." Even Fox News, long a fortress of spin, looked shaken. Anchors stumbled. Veteran analysts whispered off camera, "We didn't think she had that much." They aired the footage, but they couldn't mute the weight behind it. On MSNBC, the clip looped under one word in bold, "Undone." On Twitter, Jasmine Crockett trended globally. So did #the folder, #Fifth Amendment fail, #Truth isn't polite. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly in a back office beneath the hearing room, surrounded by staffers too stunned to speak. She didn't look at the screen, didn't refresh her feed. She stared at a single page, Exhibit 19C, the IRS document that spoke louder than any headline. "It was never about noise," she said quietly. "It was about the echo. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't just fall. It reverberates. It climbs. It multiplies. It breaks through the walls built by wealth, through barriers built by fear." And in this precise, irretrievable moment of American history, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just the woman who stood up. She was the echo that refused to fade. The room around her had become a tomb, marble cold, eerily quiet. Trump's exit still echoed like a slammed door in the nation's memory. Ivanka's silence remained in the corner, haunting, a ghost no one wanted to name. The committee chair called for recess, but no one moved with purpose. They moved like people who had just witnessed the inner scaffolding of power collapse in on itself. But amid the tremors, Jasmine stood. No theatrics, no raised chin, just steady and unshaken, just a woman rising, because it was time. Cameras swiveled toward her in perfect sync, microphones tilting as if instinctually drawn to her voice before she even spoke. The gallery, packed with reporters who had already drafted tomorrow's headlines, fell still once more. She walked slowly to the center mic, the one reserved for witnesses delivering closing remarks. But this wasn't closure. It was ignition. No notes. No glances to aides. No blinking. "Let's get one thing clear," she began, voice low and resonant, like smoke curled over steel. "This isn't about left or right." She paused, not for drama, but for weight. "This is about up and down. About who gets crushed and who gets covered. Who gets arrested for writing bad checks, and who builds empires on lies, with a smile and a signature." The words didn't just land. They sank in. The shift was palpable. Even the reporters in the back row weren't just listening. They were absorbing, processing. "Because I've seen what justice looks like," Jasmine continued, "when your name isn't famous. I've sat with mothers evicted from homes they barely held together because the system moved faster than they could. I've watched teenagers get cuffed for a stolen sandwich, while billion-dollar charities launder millions through galas that never existed and get applauded for it." Behind her, Ivanka Trump's signature still glowed on the monitors. Stamped. Verified. Unarguable. "They call this political," Jasmine said, eyes narrowing. "But the truth has no party. It's not red. It's not blue. It's ink on paper. It's money you can trace. It's a microphone that doesn't lie, even when powerful people do." One Republican leaned back in his chair, face tight, lips sealed. Across the aisle, Democrats didn't cheer. No smiles. No applause. Just awe. Jasmine stepped forward once. "This room," she said, "it wasn't built for people like me. It was built to make people like me feel small." But here's the thing. Truth doesn't care about architecture. And it doesn't whisper when it's tired of being buried. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full. heavy with reckoning. The people who walk into this building with million-dollar last names think the rest of us will never speak loud enough to matter, she said. But we are speaking now. And we're not asking. We're demanding. No one moved. No one interrupted. I didn't come here to play politics, Jasmine continued. I came here to count every dollar, follow every lie, and carry every name, no matter how golden it sounds, under the same standard the rest of us live by. And then, she delivered the line that would outlast the hearing, outlast the scandal, outlast the moment itself. Truth doesn't care about your legacy. And neither do I. She turned. Cameras lunged to follow. Reporters surged. Flashbulbs sparked. But Jasmine didn't look back. Her pace was deliberate, certain, final, like someone who hadn't just won a battle, but scorched the blueprint. Because the question was no longer whether the truth could be heard. It was how loud it could echo when spoken by someone the system was built to silence. The hearing was over, but the country hadn't breathed out. It rippled across homes and headlines, across talk shows and town halls, across courtrooms and classrooms. You couldn't flip a channel, refresh a feed, or open a newspaper without seeing her name. Jasmine Crockett. The headlines shouted it. The pundits parsed it. And some tried, desperately, to spin it. By morning, Jasmine Crockett's words had been translated into 5 languages. In Times Square, her closing line, "Truth doesn't care about your legacy. And neither do I," lit up on a massive LED billboard, scrolling just beneath the NASDAQ ticker. On MSNBC, a panel of legal analysts leaned forward in rare, reverent silence as the clip of Ivanka Trump invoking the Fifth replayed. On Fox News, confusion reigned. Veteran anchors struggled, caught between defense and deflection. Mar-a-Lago remained silent, and that silence roared louder than any press release. But the loudest voice in the nation didn't come from a cable news desk. It came from a cracked cell phone speaker on a local Chicago radio call-in show. "My name's Lorraine," said a caller, her voice shaky, breath catching between every word. "I'm a widow. My husband died in Afghanistan in 2011. We had 3 kids. I applied to the Ivanka Trump Foundation's disaster support grant when our house flooded in 2022. The host leaned in, almost whispering. "Go on. They told me we were shortlisted, told me to wait. I never heard back." A pause. I kept waiting. "We lost the house." Another pause, deeper now. I kept telling myself, "It's Ivanka. She's a mother. She'll help us." Then a sharp inhale. I was stupid. Silence gripped the line. Then Lorraine broke it one last time. She took my hope and turned it into a PR stunt. Jasmine gave it back to me in truth. The clip spread like wildfire. By noon, Lorraine was trending across platforms, alongside tags like #TrumpCharityFraud and #CrockettStrikesBack. Local radio stations from Georgia to Wisconsin opened dedicated phone lines just for people impacted by the Ivanka Trump Foundation. A veteran from El Paso called in, saying he'd been promised mental health services that never materialized. A nurse from Cleveland said she'd mailed in $500 from her COVID relief check because Ivanka's website said it would go to frontline heroes. It didn't. On The View, Whoopi Goldberg held up a screenshot of Jasmine's spreadsheet and said, "You don't need a law degree. You just need eyes." This was theft. On CNN, a former IRS investigator reviewed the evidence live. "Those signatures are clean. Unforgeable. Damning." The nation wasn't just reacting, it was remembering. The silent losses. The ignored voices. The hope spun into headlines and dropped without explanation. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't say a word. She wasn't on TV. She wasn't posting on social media. She wasn't celebrating. She was working, reviewing transcripts, preparing the next round of questions, and making sure every story, like Lorraine's, was documented, preserved, and carried into the record with precision. Because in a world deafened by noise, Jasmine Crockett was the signal that pierced through. How many promises had been broken under the disguise of charity? How many voices were still waiting to be heard? The praise wasn't unanimous. Not everyone cheered when Jasmine stepped into history. For every headline lauding her bravery, there was a whisper behind closed doors, a whisper from someone whose foundation was trembling. And those whispers soon turned darker. Less than 12 hours after the hearing ended, the first threat arrived. An unmarked envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Florida. It landed on the desk of Jasmine's district office. Inside, one line typed, "You've gone too far. Women like you don't live long in this game." No name, no fingerprints, just venom, folded neatly in paper. Her chief of staff handed her the envelope without a word. Jasmine took it, read the message once, then again. No signature, just poison typed in black ink. Then, without a word, she tore it in half, dropped the pieces into the shredder, and watched them vanish. Not because it didn't shake her, but because she refused to let it live rent-free in her mind. It would have no dignity, no space, not even a drawer. But the threats didn't stop there. They flooded in, emails laced with venom, anonymous voicemails promising retribution, messages scrawled in rage from faceless names. Some vile, some violent. A former congressman took to a conservative podcast to call her a reckless race baiter who thinks she's Harriet Tubman with a subpoena. The host laughed. The audience cheered. But louder than all of that were the letters. They came by the thousands. From teachers, from nurses, from retired janitors, from people who had lost something and, for the first time, saw someone stand up and say, "Your pain matters." A fifth-grade class in Atlanta wrote, "Thank you for showing us that the truth can win." A letter handwritten in shaky cursive read, "My son went to jail for a bounce check. Watching you hold that red folder, I cried for the first time in years." Jasmine read every one. In between hearings, in long hallways, under the glow of her desk lamp at midnight. She read them, not for validation, but because they proved the truth hadn't just echoed, it landed. Then came the editorial. The Washington Post. Full back page. Sunday edition. The headline was simple. Crockett has redefined oversight. It wasn't poetic. It was surgical. It said Jasmine didn't just question power. She dismantled its disguise. Where others settled for moments, she delivered facts, receipts, consequences. They compared her calm to Barbara Jordan, her clarity to Shirley Chisholm, but noted that Jasmine's battlefield wasn't a closed-door chamber. It was a live stream, a nation's front-row seat to justice. The piece ended with a single line. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the floor. And yet, the very next morning, Jasmine Crockett walked to work like it was any other Monday. No added security detail. No speeches. Just her, a leather briefcase in hand, passing news vans, protesters, and flashing headlines, as if history itself were just another checkpoint. Because she knew something few did. Truth doesn't travel with comfort. It travels with consequence. And when a woman dares to speak against a dynasty, is it any surprise that echoes come strapped with crosshairs? It came not with fanfare, not with cameras, but with a single press release. No podium, no primetime, just a white sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice, and 13 words that detonated across the American landscape. A full federal investigation into the Ivanka Trump Foundation is hereby open. By noon, the DOJ seal was everywhere. Screens, billboards, breaking banners. DOJ opens criminal probe into Trump Family Foundation. Crack in the armor. The Crockett effect. Cable anchors scrambled. Analysts dissected. But no one needed to explain what the country already knew. Jasmine Crockett had done what no one else had managed in 7 years. She cracked the myth. She pierced the invincibility. Outside her office, reporters formed a human wall. Staffers whispered through Capitol hallways. Fox News spun every lever it could, but nothing stuck. Jasmine didn't gloat. No press tour. No tweets. No victory lap. When a barrage of microphones surrounded her for comment, she paused, looked into the lights, and said simply, "Don't thank me. Look at who had to pay the price before someone finally listened." She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She turned and walked back inside. And the reporter, stunned, stood there, mic in hand, with no idea what to ask next. Because what do you say to someone who just rewrote the rules of power and doesn't even want the credit? While the world scrambled to define the moment, Jasmine Crockett kept walking forward, unbothered by labels or legacy. And behind her, the fallout spread like wildfire on brittle grass. Former staffers of the Trump Foundation began scrambling for legal representation. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows, emboldened by the echo Jasmine had sparked. A subpoena landed on Eric Trump's doorstep before the sun had fully set. Emergency meetings lit up Capitol Hill, closed-door huddles behind tinted glass, and silent panic. Somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, rage boiled over. Donald Trump reportedly hurled his phone into a marble fireplace. The media called it a reckoning, but Jasmine wouldn't have used that word. To her, it was just math, finally catching up to power. Receipts outpacing excuses. The long shadow of justice stretching far enough to finally graze the doorsteps of privilege. That evening, she stood alone in her office, bathed in the soft shimmer of Capitol lights flickering across the National Mall. A manila folder, stamped confidential with the seal of the Department of Justice, rested on her desk. She hadn't opened it. Not yet, because Jasmine knew the biggest shifts didn't come with headlines or noise. They came in the silence that followed, when power realized it was no longer invisible. Outside her window, a quiet procession of protesters carried candles and cardboard signs. The largest among them read, "Justice, not branding." And across the Atlantic, the echoes reached global shores. The BBC called it America's Reckoning, televised. Le Monde wrote, "La vérité n'est pas besoin de frontières." Crockett vint de l'éprouver. Al Jazeera aired, "When silence is exposed, can American democracy still correct itself?" The world wasn't just watching, it was responding. Inside her office, Jasmine whispered into the quiet, "Not for anyone, not even aloud. Let the fire spread. Let it reach the parts they thought would never burn." Because when a dynasty catches flame, it doesn't just scorch the past. It dares the nation to ask, when legacy burns, what rises from the ash? Justice or another lie? The Capitol slept. But the light in Jasmine Crockett's office stayed on, not harsh, not glaring, just warm enough to cast her shadow against the glass. She stood barefoot, heels abandoned by the door, her blazer draped over a chair. Her shoulders finally relaxed. The dome outside shimmered like a monument to memory, made of marble, shaped by power. She didn't move. She wasn't searching for more evidence. Not now. She was listening, to the quiet, to the weight, to the fragile stillness that arrives only after something shatters and no one knows what will rise in its place. Behind her, the red folder had been returned to its drawer. Locked. Sealed. Its work, for now, complete. But Jasmine knew what most didn't. Truth doesn't rest just because the cameras turn off. It lingers. It waits. It haunts. She ran a hand through her curls, exhaled slow and deep, letting the silence seep into her bones. This wasn't closure. It was ignition. A storm was coming, one no one had trained for. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she had no hearings to prep, no statements to rehearse, just a memory of where it all began. Not with this scandal, not this headline, but the calling. A basement office in South Dallas. Peeling paint. A printer that jammed every third page. She was fresh out of law school, neck deep in student loans. But she had a stapler, 2 chairs, and a vow to take every case others ignored. She remembered the woman who walked in crying, clutching an eviction notice in one hand and a baby sock in the other. Jasmine didn't win that case, but she bought her a week. And in that week, the woman found a job, found a way to stay. Jasmine never forgot her name. There were nights she drafted motions by candlelight because the lights were cut. Days when judges looked through her. Nights when prosecutors laughed behind closed doors. But she never stopped, because she had seen injustice up close, and it didn't wear horns. It wore silk. It smiled. It signed checks. And now, on live television, she had cracked it open. She turned to the Capitol dome, glowing like a lie the nation could no longer ignore, and whispered, not for press, not for cameras, but for herself. "You said I was too loud, but you heard me anyway." Her phone buzzed again across the desk. Another alert. Another message. But Jasmine didn't check it. Not yet. Because she already knew what it would say. The truth was out. And the storm had begun. Another interview request. She didn't check it. Instead, Jasmine turned away from the window, walked to her desk, and picked up the envelope, the one that started it all. The threat. The warning. The attempt to scare her into silence. She slipped it into a safe beneath her desk. 3 smooth clicks. Click, click, click. Then stillness, her hand resting against the cold steel. Because Jasmine Crockett understood what so many missed. When you speak truth to power, you don't just create enemies. You inherit the silence they once tried to bury you with. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she glanced at the screen, ready to swipe it away. Another interview, another network, another panel requesting comment. But the name on the screen stopped her breath mid-step. Anita Hill. Hello, Jasmine said softly. The reply came low, steady, unwavering. You didn't just speak for yourself, Jasmine, the voice said. You spoke for every woman who's ever been told to sit down. Jasmine leaned against the desk. Her chest tightened, not from fear, from recognition. I watched every second, Anita continued. You stood in that room like it belonged to you. And now it does. No applause. No fanfare. Just one voice. One generation reaching for the next. Jasmine didn't cry, but something inside her cracked. Not broken, opened. Because this wasn't praise. This was a passing of the torch. Anita's last words were gentle. Final. Immortal. They tried to erase me. You rewrote the ending. Then the line went silent. And Jasmine stood taller than she ever had. She remained still, phone still in hand, staring out over the quiet hum of the city. But in that moment, she didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded. Not by staffers, not by security, but by every woman who had ever been told. Sit down. Be quiet. Don't make trouble. They were still here. And now, they had her voice. Jasmine placed the phone down gently, like it was sacred. Outside, the Capitol dome still burned bright, its marble sheen luminous in the night. But inside her, a different kind of fire burned. The kind you inherit when the woman who walked first tells you, it's your turn to run. And so, when Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the Capitol, the night didn't greet her with calm. It erupted. Cameras exploded like starbursts. Reporters surged forward, boom mics lunging like spears. The marble steps beneath her feet felt heavier now, like they were holding the weight of everything she'd said. The weight of history. But Jasmine walked as if the path was already known. They shouted over one another. Miss Crockett, what happens next? Did you expect this fallout? Should Ivanka be indicted? She paused halfway down the steps. A flash went off, so bright, her figure briefly vanished into silhouette. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Not the smile of a victor, but the smile of someone who had earned every word. And then she said it. Clear, quiet, undeniable. I don't need the spotlight. I need justice. The words didn't echo. They landed, solid, sharp, final. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't gasp. They paused, not in disbelief, but in understanding. Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to make a moment. She had come to start a movement. Behind her, the Capitol rose like an aging lion. Majestic, scarred, still dangerous. Inside, the truth had been dragged into daylight. Outside, it was learning how to stand on its own. A reporter tried again. Do you think the Trump family's legacy can survive this? Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because survival doesn't mean innocence. Sometimes it's just a delay in consequence. She continued down the steps, each heel strike a punctuation mark on the sentence no one had dared to write. Until now. Her team followed quietly, reverent. No one spoke. And Jasmine didn't look back. At the base of the marble stairs, a young girl stood just behind the barricade, maybe 13, eyes wide, arms outstretched, holding a piece of cardboard cut from an old box. On it, in thick black marker, were 3 words. Truth has curls, too. Jasmine stopped. Her smile broke wide this time, unfiltered. She stepped to the barricade and gently touched the girl's hand through the metal rails. No cameras captured it. No microphones picked up what she whispered. But the girl nodded, her eyes full, not with awe, but with something deeper. Hope. Then Jasmine turned toward the street. Not as a congresswoman. Not as the woman who exposed a dynasty. But as someone who once sat in the back of a courtroom with no press, no power, and no promises. Now, the country was watching. The road ahead wasn't golden. It would be hard, sharp, and steep, lined with denial, resistance, and fear. But it was hers. And she would walk it with the same certainty she had used to tear through decades of silence. The fight might be over, but the war for truth never ends quietly. And Washington felt it. The headlines didn't wait for the ink to dry. Trump Foundation frozen. Ivanka steps down from all boards. Crockett hearing shifts D.C. power dynamics. The air in D.C. didn't buzz with celebration. It crackled with recalibration. Behind closed doors, panic replaced power. Old alliances vanished like vapor. Emails were scrubbed. Statements rewritten. And in the shadow of a single hearing, the empire of plausible deniability began to crack, like a glacier split from beneath. The DOJ moved faster than expected. By noon, an emergency injunction locked every account tied to the Trump Foundation. From Delaware trusts to Cayman shell corporations, frozen. The motion cited overwhelming preliminary evidence of fraudulent intent, a phrase that hadn't been used near a presidential family in over 50 years. But the shock didn't come from the filing. It came from Ivanka. Without consulting her father, without press or preamble, she released a two-line statement at 6:02 a.m. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from all philanthropic boards and initiatives. I will be taking time to reflect with my family. No cameras, no apology, no strategy, just silence, clean, cold, deliberate. And Washington heard it for what it was. A surrender dressed in silk. Jasmine read the headline on a cracked government-issued iPad, seated alone in the back of a black sedan. No expression, no nod, just a quiet stare, as if she was waiting for the truth to stop surprising her. Because this wasn't justice. Not yet. This was reaction. A flinch. The gas power takes when it's finally caught without its makeup. Outside, protesters surrounded the federal courthouse. Some held signs. Some held their children. But all of them, all colors, ages, professions, looked toward the crumbling house of Trump with the same question written across their faces. What took so long? Back on Capitol Hill, the tremors spread fast. Lobbyists canceled meetings. Major donors went dark. Senate aides wiped entire inboxes. And behind the curtain of every polished marble office, the machinery of old power began to sputter. One Fox News anchor, once the voice of Trump-era defense, broke script mid-segment, glanced off camera, and whispered, "We may be watching the beginning of an American reckoning." The studio cut to commercial, and in a quiet corner office overlooking the Potomac, Jasmine Crockett stood before her window, expression unreadable, body still. The war wasn't over, but a chapter had slammed shut. Not with cheers, not with chaos, but with resignations, with frozen accounts, with shaken donors, with a country suddenly wide awake and asking, how deep does the rot go? Jasmine knew the final page hadn't been written yet, but she also knew something else. The next chapter wouldn't be a repeat. Not this time. That evening, the lights inside the Howard University auditorium burned not just bright, but holy. Over 1,000 law students packed the rows in quiet rows of tailored suits and tightly held hope. Some clutched notebooks. Others gripped their knees. But all of them shared the same unspoken desire. They weren't there to be comforted. They were there to be ignited. Jasmine Crockett stood center stage. No podium. No script. She stood closer to them, as if the stage was just a scene between generations. The cameras were live, but she didn't perform. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had become a signal, a siren, a spark. And when she spoke, the air shifted. She looked out across the crowd like a judge surveying a jury not yet born when her fight began. And when her voice came, it didn't rise. It landed. "If they fear your voice," she said, eyes sweeping the crowd, "it's because it's doing the job." No one clapped, not yet. It was the kind of line that hits the skin first, then burrows deep to the bone. She didn't wait. She moved forward. You'll be told to wait your turn, to lower your tone, to play the game so maybe, you can change it. But I didn't come here to teach you patience. I came to remind you. The system doesn't move unless you force it. Then it came, the applause. Not neat, not polite, but guttural. Like a room finally letting go of a breath it didn't know it had been holding for generations. Jasmine paused, let it crest, then softened. "When I stood in front of that committee," she said, voice steady, "I wasn't thinking about politics. I was thinking about the women I couldn't save when I was a public defender. The mothers scammed by promises disguised as charity. The kids who believed in fairy tales printed on red hats. I was thinking of the silence they swallowed, and how loud it needed to come back out." A few students stood. Then a wave followed. One by one, she walked slowly across the stage, not pacing, claiming it. "Let me be clear," she said. "I didn't win. I revealed. And revealing hurts. It costs. But you cannot build a country worth inheriting without first gutting the rot." By now, the whole room stood, clapping, shouting, crying, but Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper, and the room leaned in, drawn like iron to a magnet. "So when they call you angry," she paused, "remember, it's a tactic. When they call you dangerous, know it's projection. And when they tell you to sit down. She stopped. A smile. Small. Sharp. Ask them if they're scared of the view when you're standing. Thunder. That's what it sounded like. Thunder in a room built to echo. She didn't thank them. She didn't bow. She just raised one hand. Not goodbye, but a reminder. That truth doesn't whisper. It walks into the room uninvited. And tonight, it wore heels, a calm stare, and the name Jasmine Crockett. Outside, the press line swelled like a tide after a storm. Reporters jostled. Cameras flashed like lightning against the marble. They chased a final quote. But Jasmine descended the auditorium steps slowly, steadily. The late sun bathed her in gold, like justice pulled from the sky. She didn't speak. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Because sometimes, the loudest answer is the woman who keeps walking forward while the world scrambles to catch up. She let the silence stretch, like velvet. Thick. Undeniable. Earned. Then, a voice cut through the noise, sharp. Young male. Hopeful. Maybe desperate. If you had to do it again, would you? Every microphone leaned toward her. The crowd hushed. It wasn't a complicated question, but the weight of it dropped like a gavel. She stopped mid-step. Turned. Her gaze locked straight into a camera lens, as if the country itself was staring back through it. No hesitation. No flair. Just calm, clean truth. I'd do it louder. Not a word more. Not a comma spared. The line hit the ground like thunder. And the silence that followed? It wasn't emptiness. It was reverence. Even the reporters forgot their notes for a beat. Because in that single sentence, Jasmine Crockett didn't just close a chapter. She carved it into stone. She turned again and kept walking, heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome counting down to whatever came next. Her team followed behind, silent, steady. They knew this wasn't closure. It wasn't vindication. It was the breath before the next blow, the stillness before the next storm. Inside newsrooms across America, editors typed the quote before the footage had aired. On Twitter, the line trended before she reached the black car waiting at the curb. I'd do it louder. Not defiance. Warning. She didn't wave. She didn't look back. Because the woman once told to sit down, girl, had become the voice even power couldn't drown. And somewhere, in a boardroom, a bunker, or a quiet kitchen in middle America, someone was watching this moment, realizing the world just shifted an inch. And inches, when justice is involved, can move mountains. She didn't rewrite history. She made it flinch. She stood in the place where silence used to reign, and power blinked first. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave sentence to make power flinch. When Jasmine Crockett said, I'd do it louder, it wasn't rage. It was clarity. It was a reminder. Truth doesn't wait for permission. And for everyone who's ever been told to be quiet, especially now, in a season where so many feel overlooked, your voice still matters, still carries the weight to shift the story. So if injustice stood before you today, would you whisper? Or would you speak louder? For those who can't anymore, leave a comment. Share your voice. Because silence never changed anything. But you still can. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where one voice can shake the powerful. And silence? Silence is never the end. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just expose the truth. It might ask you to stand with it. What part made you stop and feel something? Speak up, because remembering together is where justice begins. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and educational reflection. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to ignite civic awareness and conscience. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't fade. It waits in the quiet until someone brave enough brings it back to light. Will that someone be you?